Chapter 3. And Solomon made affinity with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David, until he had made an end of building his own house, and the house of the Lord, and the wall of Jerusalem round about. Only the people sacrificed in high places, because there was no house built unto the name of the Lord until those days. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. Only he sacrificed and burnt incense in high places. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. 1,000 burnt offerings did Solomon offer upon that altar. In Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, Ask what I shall give thee. And Solomon said, Thou hast shewed unto thy servant David my father great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father. And I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or to come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people which thou hast chosen, a great people, that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? And the speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and an understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. And if thou wilt walk in my ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as thy father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. And Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And he came to Jerusalem, and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered up burnt offerings, and offered peace offerings, and made a feast to all his servants. There came there 2 women that were harlots unto the king, and stood before him. And the one woman said, O my lord, I and this woman dwell in one house, and I was delivered of a child with her in the house. And it came to pass the 3rd day after that I was delivered, that this woman was delivered also. And we were together, there was no stranger with us in the house, save we 2 in the house. And this woman's child died in the night, because she overlaid it. And she arose at midnight, and took my son from beside me, while thine handmaid slept, and laid it in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I arose in the morning to give my child suck, behold, it was dead. But when I had considered it in the morning, behold, it was not my son which I did bear. And the other woman said, Nay, but the living is my son, and the dead is thy son. And this said, No, but the dead is thy son, and the living is my son. Thus they spake before the king. Then said the king, The one saith, This is my son that liveth, and thy son is the dead. And the other saith, Nay, but thy son is the dead, and my son is the living. And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, Divide the living child in 2, and give half to the one and half to the other. Then spake the woman whose living child was unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son. And she said, O my lord, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. The other said, Let it be neither mine nor thine, but divided. Then the king answered and said, Give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. She is the mother thereof. And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. There are 2 things in this chapter that you need to be really particularly aware of, because one is showing something that is going to cause Solomon huge problems towards the end of his reign. And the other one is something that is plain and simple changed from what it was originally to something somebody else wanted. You need to understand that there were revisionists who were writing this later on, and there were some changes that were made. We've seen a number of places already, and one of the changes was made here. First off, however, it talks about Solomon marrying a daughter of the Egyptian Pharaoh. And you need to understand that at the south end of Israel, Solomon's kingdom, David's kingdom and Solomon's kingdom butted up against Egypt. The eastern part of Egypt is what we would call the Sinai Peninsula area, and they shared it. Now, Egypt was very used to thinking of all of that territory, and up to and including Canaan, as its sphere of influence and a place that it could just go and do whatever it wanted with. And it could use Canaan as a place to get food and as a military campground so it could attack Assyria or Babylon or whatever, anybody that was in the area. That was, as far as they were concerned, that was their right to do. And Solomon obviously didn't want that to happen, and so he arranged for a political marriage where he would take a daughter of Pharaoh, and that would basically be like signing a treaty that basically says, you won't touch us. We won't try to take any more territory. That was what those marriages were for, was cementing a relationship between the leaders of the various countries, the kings, rulers of the country, so that they didn't harm either anybody. You know, you didn't go attacking the king of your daughter or your sister or whoever they had married. However, we find that towards the end of his life, we'll see this as we go on, Solomon married many wives from many nations, and then he built them temples to their own gods in Jerusalem, and he started to worship those false gods. And shortly after his death, the country disintegrated, was divided into two. So it went from being the very biggest it had ever been to being a total disaster within a few years after Solomon died, for the very reason that we see here. He started to marry women that were not of the Hebrew faith and did not worship God the way he should. Now the second thing is, we see that he has a dream. And in the dream, according to what we have in this chapter, in the King James Version, it says, you know, it gives the impression that David was a righteous individual. And a lot of the later Hebrew people who were transcribing this wanted to believe and put stuff in and revise stuff to indicate that David was righteous. But David had been responsible for the murder of Uriah the Hittite and stealing his wife, committing adultery and murder, and that made him anything but righteous. And so we believe a better translation, a more complete translation, a more accurate translation, was not the indication that if your heart is righteous as was the heart of your father David, was if your heart stays righteous as was not the heart of your father David. Something along that line. And that way we understand that David had committed what amounts to and a virtually unpardonable sins of killing somebody and adultery. And those things were things that David was going to have to pay for. And they were not things the Lord could accept as having no effect whatsoever. And because he had knowingly killed somebody, especially knowingly killed somebody, there had to be some punishment affixed. And David knew what it was. But in the scriptures that we have, you need to understand that just because somebody says, David was praised, that isn't the way it was in the beginning of the scripture. And we have additional scriptures that tell us that that's not the translation that we need here, because it's not correct. So Solomon starts off with his reign. He starts to have a few problems with his Egyptian wives, and at the same time, he gets warned that his heart has to be right. Otherwise, he's in big trouble. And he can't go after the kind of things that his father went after. Otherwise, he's going to reap the kind of pain and suffering that his father had and have a much shorter reign.